From the three questions, I would ask you all to be relatively pointed and succinct, please. Gus, I know Gus actually got in ahead of the pack. He sent in a slide to answer the first question: should Australia consider the nuclear option?
This is some data from the Bloomberg New Energy Finance from 2016, showing what they anticipate being the global average of new energy additions. So you'll see the biggest one to 2040, they expect the biggest amount to come from solar energy. The nuclear is the little red dashes you see there. So this is the global average. In Australia, and this is because the cost of renewable energy is coming down, the cost of nuclear is going up because of the safety issues that have come through. But in Australia, they have a lot of additional advantages of renewables over nuclear. We'd need an act of parliament to build power stations here. We don't presently have a regulatory framework. We have a better renewable resource than the global average. There are a limited number of places in the grid where current technologies could be accommodated. Of course, new ones are under development. And also there's significant social resistance. So I guess the comment is that nuclear globally has a role in CO2 mitigation. In Australia, I think it's unlikely to have a significant role with these issues.
Thank you very much. Any of your fellow panellists like to comment?
Just to note that Japan and Germany actually are switching off their nuclear power stations and moving to other sources. Yeah. Japan wants to get all its energy generated from hydrogen, and most likely it's going to be produced in Australia. So if we're going to export hydrogen to Japan to generate its electricity, might as well we could use it ourselves because we have a lot of renewable resources to be able to do it.
Thank you, Bassam. Nobody else? Right. The second question: if renewable hydrogen was available today for under $2 a kilo, how long would it take to decarbonise transport and industry, and what opportunities would open up to decarbonise agriculture? Again, guess who has a slide prepared for us? You've got 1 minute.
1 minute, okay. I'll just show one slide then. Two slides. The dollars a kilogram is showing currently it's around about nearly 6, and this is the CSIRO's anticipated cost trajectory. The blue line is the best case scenario, coming down to around about 2 with current commercial technology, their anticipation. So natural gas, this is converting the same numbers to dollars a gigajoule, and the bottom red dashed line is the cost of natural gas. So I think so markets will emerge on that current trajectory. They are emerging today, renewable electricity, but we need to have a step change in technology before industry will take over and we can compete with the price of natural gas or a carbon price. But I think the step changes are possible. We just need to invest in them.
Thank you, Gus. Anybody else like to have a say? It's not really everybody else's area of expertise. They're not just, trying not to answer, except yours. You're right.
Just for the transport, I don't think it's going to be viable anytime soon, as I mentioned in my talk. So while it will have applications in the industry, but not in transport in the short term. But there will be niche markets anyway.
Thanks, Bassam. Now, the next question is from someone who's identified themselves as a secondary school science teacher. And the question is, what key components must I include in my discussions with students to assist them to develop a sense of ownership and responsibility for action on climate change? Which is a lovely question. And I somehow feel Sarah should kick off on this one.
All right, I'll give it a go, and I don't have a slide, so I'm not as well prepared. Well, there's obviously lots of things that as teachers can do, but in this situation, I think encouraging empathy as much as possible. So for teachers to try and teach their students, especially here in Australia, in Adelaide, you know, that we are actually very well off. So we know that that the more people feel, the more well off they feel, the wealthier they are, the more that they live in a country that's ready. And by ready, it means they're economic ready in terms of GDP. They have high GDP to adapt. They have institutions that are ready to adapt to other external situations. So we know that the more people live in these sort of countries, the more protected they feel against climate change. But this is not the situation for most other countries in the world. Many residents who feel very vulnerable to climate change impacts. So in terms of teaching empathy, teaching students that, you know, lots of people in the world are not like us, they can't adapt, I think that's probably one of the key things they can do.
So one of the things that I would encourage a teacher to do is to get their children to look at where the products that they consume actually come from. And I'm talking here around some of the agricultural foodstuffs and the like, for example, think about where the fish you're eating might be actually from and what the carbon footprint around it might be. We currently import quite a lot of fish from Asia, for example. It might be slightly more expensive, but perhaps have a smaller carbon footprint to eat our own fish or fish from Australia, for example. And so if children actually were able to go shopping, look at where things come from, you often get stickers on fruits and the like, that would also encourage them to be thinking about what impact they might actually be having.
The other thing that we think would be very useful is getting students involved in measuring their world, working out what it is that's going on. Some of you will be aware of the University of Adelaide's role in supporting the digital technologies curriculum adoption throughout Australia over the last 2 years, and where we've discovered a lot of success and increased confidence in both teachers and students has been giving people the opportunity to get their hands on it, to get involved. There are a number of community projects. There's a thing called the Things Network that has got a large-scale network where you can put these little devices in and put them in a school and measure things and report that data. The University of Adelaide is launching a tie-in network in conjunction with another one through the city of Prospect, Connected Cities, where a teacher can, with a very low-cost device, possibly from a lending library, have students out there measuring what's going on in their environment. How warm is it? How dry is it? What's happening to the tomatoes? What are the light levels doing? And then equipping students with the ability to understand that, to, you know, we don't want to turn everybody into data scientists necessarily, but the idea that they can look at that and get some hands-on experience. There's a lot of good support material out for there. There are a number of programs, the CSIRO's scientists in schools, mathematicians in schools, and I think it's that all of us in the research community and the education community working into those areas so that our children grow up feeling that they can measure and understand the world, and assisting them in agency at a time when a lot of us are scared, and the language we're using would probably be quite intimidating when people come into that. So it's equipping people to be more confident and to feel that they can actually execute, to actually make change, do something.
Anybody else?
I'd like to emphasise that very last point, that change can be exciting, and to get school children used to thinking about change and not frightened by the fact that the world that they live in 10 years' time might look very, very different to the world they live in today. That is really what we're talking about, is rapid change. But when I look back to what the world felt like and looked like when I first really came into it, what it looked like in 1970 and 1990, when I look today, it's a totally different world. So I'm not frightened, and no child should be frightened. In fact, they should be excited and understand that prosperity comes from change. Poverty comes from refusing to change and adapt.
That's some great advice for our secondary teacher, wherever he or she is. Now, question and answer. So it's up to you now, all of you, to put forward your questions, and we'll go for it. We're at 7:30 now, so I think we'll go for about 10 minutes. This gentleman right at the back had his hand up first, and then this gentleman here in the middle. Unless you can project your voice very well. Oh, okay.
So, with all of that, who would you like to see in this coming government to implement some of these changes over the next, 2 terms, if we can get a stable government?
Who wants to take that? Of course.
I think we should take it out of the politician's hand and have statutory authorities that actually can achieve the targets and find the best options for Australia, rather than politicians use it as a football.
Anyone else? Nobody else. Thank you for your question. Now there's a gentleman, yes, this gentleman here with his hand up. And then there's a gentleman.
Rob Dickinson, Hydro City, everybody, you guys know me. There's lots of reference to EVs on the one hand and renewable energy on the other, but given that recharging electric vehicles from coal is worse than a petrol vehicle, you have to have renewable energy, much larger scale renewable energy in advance, progressing in advance of EVs. But nobody's talking about that. So what do we do about that? How do we educate the politicians about the need for that?
I think the answer to that is that we all have to understand that we don't know what innovations are really going to occur, and there's going to have to be a basic framework in place that enables Australia to adopt to whatever technology emerges. There's some really exciting ideas around and really exciting opportunities, but the mix is going to have to change and change continuously. So backing any one solution is the wrong way to go. Keeping everything alive and letting innovation determine where we go is the secret to rapid change, and it's rapid change that we need. A basic framework.
So I would add to that. I mean, I think the point you make, Rob, is very good. Obviously, if you run an electric vehicle from a grid that is CO2 intensive, then you don't decrease emissions. However, the other point to note is the time scale of change, which Bassam pointed out, that even if we start introducing alternative vehicles such as EVs now, it will still, because we're only going to do it by the new vehicles, it's going to take something like 20 to 30 years. Mostly vehicles stay in the fleet for some 20 odd years. So assuming we act in parallel with beginning to transform the transportation sector and the electricity sector together, otherwise, if we don't start doing the transportation sector now, then the time scale will still catch up with us down the track, but we won't have the other vehicles in place. And I guess the other point is that we also need to consider local emissions, which are particularly in more dense cities, particularly in Sydney and Melbourne, where you also have got local emissions which are lower on things like EVs than conventional petrol engines.
Anyone else? Okay, gentleman up there with the tie.
This is probably more a economics-based question rather than a science question, and it might be best directed towards Mike here, but I was wondering if you are familiar with the carbon tax and dividend policy option for tackling emissions, and if you are, what your thoughts are on its effectiveness.
I think you said the revenue neutral carbon tax, is that right? Yes, totally aware of. The idea behind it is that you can tax everybody simply in proportion to what they use and then return the money back. And so there's no net impact on you other than the opportunity if you reduce emissions to profit from doing that. It's a very simple idea. It's been proposed around the world for many, many times. It's a variant of the return to the community framework, which I've suggested that you do need to give some money to federal government, some to state and some to local government. You could include that some straight to households if you wanted to, so different sharing. The important thing with all of these mechanisms is it locks people in. Once you get used to receiving money, you want to keep on receiving it. It's a human characteristic. If you want a robust system which will last forever, one of the policy design tricks is to build in mechanisms so that people become dependent on the solution, and the more they become dependent on the solution, the more people bank on it and the more you get the solution.
Thank you. Now there was a hand up in the middle up here, was the fourth hand up behind you, but it's gone down again. So we're going to go to this young lady here in the red jacket, and then this lady here, and that gentleman there. Oh, okay. There you go. You've been awarded the next opportunity.
We had some interesting ideas about how we would teach the new generation. My question is, what can we learn from the new generation?
Gus is nodding. Oh, okay, you're just agreeing, sorry.
The thing that I learn from the new generation, I also learn from the oldest, and that is that the future matters. I find it fascinating that the older people that become, the more that they become concerned about what the world's going to be like, not for their children, but for their grandchildren. There's a fascinating alliance between the oldest and the youngest in society, and almost a caring abandon from the middle. I think both ends learn that the future matters and become more concerned about the future than the present. So that's worry about the future.
There's an old joke that if you want to solve an unsolvable problem at a university, you give it to an undergraduate who doesn't know that it's impossible. But the truth of that is that the amount of enthusiasm that we get, the amount of passion that students are coming into university with is really quite high. You know, and there's that, they would like a future. They would like a future, and they really don't need to sleep anywhere near as much. They have an enormous amount of energy, and they have a lot of friends who they would like to communicate with. And the way that we're moving in university education to, you know, very good discipline-based approaches, but working on a more multidisciplinary side, it seems to be working quite well in that area. But ultimately, it's that passion and enthusiasm.
I think by the nature of the times they were born in, they are more adaptable than we were ever be ourselves in a way. Things are changing so fast, and then they got used to it. You know, a new phone, a new device, a new technology. So I don't think they're scared of the change. Just to comment on what Mark said, I think they worried about their standard of living, worried if you know, they're going to get what they have in a way, especially here in Australia. So I feel sometimes that they're amazingly adaptable if we direct them in the right direction in a way. But just don't comment.
Thanks for some. Yes, they are amazingly adaptable. It's not necessarily related to climate change, but my 11-year-old grandson is my computer whiz, and if I learn from him, he won't be able to fix my computer for me and my programming. So I don't think he's at all afraid of anything. Now, there was a young lady here in the red jacket.
So basically, I'm a bit of a climate activist myself, and I know that a lot of these things we can't really just solve by working small scale in just like our backyard or the like. We need to get more involved in like larger things, and just voting is a thing we can do, but that's not all. And I was like wondering if you guys have any advice on like ways we can get involved outside of just voting or just eating more renewable products. What things you would personally recommend that we would do?
Justin, half second before you.
Okay, so coming back to my point about the need for transparency and good governance. So the more individuals can highlight where vested interests are having an influence on policy, whether this means highlighting meetings, increased meetings with ministers, highlighting lobby activity, etc. The more we can expose vested interests for what they are, the more you can highlight the implications that they're having on policy. So that's one way.
I think the other very important thing to do is to talk at a very high level about what the nature of the solution looks like. And as I tried to say, it's about deciding to deal with this problem forever and to set limits, to share access, and to understand importantly that in business there is a game that's being played very cleverly at the moment, and it's about what's called asymmetric information. Business knows how to solve this problem, but they don't want to solve it. They want to try and convince governments to give them more and more money before they solve the problem profitably. And the strength of the market-based solutions that I was talking about in terms of setting up a sharing system is you reverse it around so that they make money by revealing what they know. At the moment, the game globally is to say, this is a very, very difficult, very hard problem to solve, so give us more money. The trick is to turn it around to say, we know how to play that game. You work out how much it's going to cost. We design a trusted institutional arrangement that makes you profit by revealing it. As I started, if you work out what the value of issuing shares to everybody now, it's about $50 million. Give industry the $50 million and explain to them that as they solve the problem, we get to zero emissions. When we get to zero emissions, the shares are worth nothing because the problem's solved. It's that simple.
There was someone in here, this gentleman here, if we can have a quick response, and then we'll wrap. Last question.
Thank you. I'm based in McLaren Vale. I'm a contractor, so I'm actually at the ground level. And McLaren Vale is about to roll out nationally the Sustainable Wine Growing Australia. It's going to be morphed in. It's something that actually started at the ground level, moved through community, and moved up. So we've actually done a bottom-up approach rather than a top-down approach, and I think that's sort of on there. But that aside, I think one of the things, I've been involved in agriculture most of my life, and what I've seen in a lot of agricultural sectors, and not all, and some business quite successful, is that generally that commodity prices are at a point where people just make their ends meet, make their payments and everything like that, but left in the budget when they do yearly budgeting is not enough there to do environmental projects. People on the land, farms that have been there for a long time, or people like that, actually have intimate knowledge about their land, and there's a lot of things they can do. But the problem is that, and I do a lot of budgeting for clients and stuff like that, at the end of the budgeting process, there's just not enough left in that budget there to actually do some decent projects. Comments, please.
Yes, I totally agree. So the thing I often talk about is within the agriculture sector, get rid of subsidies that are causing harmful environmental practices, whether this is subsidising diesel, subsidising irrigation infrastructure, and start trying to pay farmers for environmental benefits. So the Europe obviously have greening the cap scheme. There's no way Australia can afford that, but the more we can do things like introduce successful soil carbon markets, the more with a carbon price government might start paying more than the current $10 that they pay per tonne. So the more you can get policies in place to encourage farmers to actually do sustainable practices, this will start increasing their bottom line of improvements to actually sustainably farm. And at the same time, you remove the incentives that are causing environmental harm. So, you know, and alongside that, you know, if we can introduce, you know, as you would know, there's markets for organics and biodynamic agricultural price premiums paid. The more you can encourage consumers to pay more for their produce, I think that's something, that's a marketing ploy that really needs to be undertaken. So those are all things that can be done.
I might add that once you give people the opportunity to have access to an asset like shares, they rarely argue to have them thrown away. It's really interesting in all the fights around water policy in Australia, it's always over what the limit should be and how much farmers should have. None of them ever argue to throw away their water rights. If you define it as share of a varying limit, then you're there. They all want that. They'll fight like mad over the limit, and that's the right argument we should have. And giving, if you think through 50 million and farmers are about a quarter basically of all the emissions, that's a lot of money to offer the agricultural sector to get around and incentivise them to adjust. It'll be interesting to see if they say it's too difficult, we have to stay out and we let electricity, stationary industry, transport move ahead, or if they want to be in before the value of the shares becomes very, very low.
I think I've got the dud mic. Okay, look, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you all for being very patient tonight. Firstly, can I thank you all for coming out tonight? It's great to see so many people interested in this event. I'd like to thank Rex and Barbara for making the effort to be here. Thank you very much. Susan, thank you for your job tonight, keeping us all under control. And in particular, this was something of an experiment for us to run a panel event like this, and the panel have done an extraordinary job in keeping to schedule and doing a fine job answering questions. So thank you all. Could you please give a round of applause to our panel? They won't go home empty-handed. We do have a gift for all of them, so we'll do that in a moment. Can I just add that if you do have any questions that you don't think were covered here tonight, please look to the Environment Institute website, and if you want to send them in, we will do our best to put written answers up on the web, or to send you a personal answer if you'd prefer. And we do have a lot more people, of course, working in this space that we can draw on to get those answers. So this is well, it's the issue of the 21st century. We have to take it seriously, and we're certainly committed to do that. So thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thanks.